Okay, very happy to welcome Lee Feinberg on the podcast today. We're going to talk about information dashboards and data visualizations in today's episode. But really, I'm excited to have this conversation with you, Lee. Really appreciate you joining today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm really glad to be here. Always love to talk about the work I'm doing.
Definitely, yeah, and I'm excited to get into that with you. But before we jump into questions, Lee, I would love if it's possible for you to share a little bit of a background about yourself and what maybe your involvement in TDWI as far as in the past goes. If you can share that with us.
Sure. Yeah. So my company, Decision Viz, uh, what I focus on is really helping companies scale their data literacy and data storytelling. And the way I do that is I developed a system. So in the world that I work in, there's a lot of chaos. And by chaos, I mean people tend to do the work the way they think is best to do it. There's no structure. So, like other strategic functions, finance, HR, IT, they all kind of have a way of working. In the world of kind of data storytelling and creating dashboards, there is no consistent way of doing the work. And so, my work with TDWI, the workshop that I run, is teaching part of that system because we only have a day. And so I've kind of pulled out the essence of the things that people can implement right away rather than trying to give them a massive amount of ideas and do this, do this, do this. Say, look, if you can do these things and follow these step-by-step approach, you can start to make a big difference, right? So I wanted to be really practical. And I started with TDWI in August of last year, although I was supposed to do my first workshop in May of 2020. So I'm a little bit behind when I was supposed to start.
Sure.
I'm glad that I'm in the game now, and it's been great.
Well, terrific. Yeah, I know we're gonna talk a little bit about that workshop. And just to mention it, for those that are listening or tuning in, Lee will be at TDWI Orlando teaching this workshop, which is taking place November 5th through November 10th. So I'm going to jump right into some of the questions here around that. The first one is, what do your students love most about this workshop?
Interesting. All right. So this first answer I say, and it's a serious answer, but it might sound strange. I think they really like the games and the prizes.
Nice.
So when I designed this workshop, I said, I don't want to listen to myself for 6 hours for sure. And I know that we need to do something to make it interesting. And so I really worked hard to make some contests and have a lot of interactivity in the learning exercises so that it's not just, hey, going through idea after idea after idea. So it's a way to reinforce the kinds of things that we've covered, but in a fun way. And I think that really makes the day much more enjoyable for everybody. And it breaks it up, and people get to hear different views on how people solve those kinds of problems and things that they learn from each of these contests. So I would say, look, we can make analytics fun. It doesn't have to be very dry. So I like I said, I am serious about that one because I also put a lot of time into making that fun. But the thing I think that also is important that I see a lot in what I hear from the students and what they say in the class and what they write in the evaluations is that it really gives them these practical steps for changing their work. So while we're going through the discussions, you can start to see the proverbial light bulb, right? Go off like, oh, if I do this, it will make a difference. It will start to change not only my behavior, but it will also start to change the way that I interact with others in my organization, whether it's my peers or my management or upper management. And that's a big part of it too. There's a lot of aspects that we go over, which are technical things you can do to make your work better. But a lot of them tie down to actually personal change, which can be really hard because I ask them to do things that require them to either behave differently or literally say something differently, because we talk about how do you respond to people in certain situations so that you can change the perspective of the discussion that you're having with someone. And that's hard, right, to do. And so we actually practice those things in class as well. So again, that when they leave, they can feel a little bit better about, hey, I did it in the class, at least I tried it. Now I at least have a starting point where I can go and do it back at work. So I think those practical aspects are really important.
Absolutely. And of course, with the gaming aspect, that's always a great way to get people engaged and have a good time. So I'm excited for all those folks that are going to sign up. They're going to have a great time in that classroom, even though it is 6 hours. It's a great way to break it up, like you mentioned. So I want to ask just a follow up there, just to cover all the bases. Are we in this workshop? Are you mostly talking about information dashboards essentially, and how to build those out, or is there something else involved with the visualization side?
Yeah, actually, it doesn't focus as much on creating a dashboard. So there's really two parts to the day. So the overall idea is about communication, right? In the end, is you're trying to communicate the information about the data, and it's visual. And so the first part of the day talks about visualization as a language. So in the same way that I'll just say English, but whatever your preferred language is, right? You have structures, you have ways of doing things. And if you understand those, then you can be a better writer. You can put together your ideas better. And so it's the same thing here, that it's not just about the software, because the software is just click here, and they all operate in kind of the same way. But if you actually understand the underlying principles of how someone perceives information and certain types of information, then you're much more in control of what you choose to write. And then you're also understanding some things that you should do in the software, maybe things you shouldn't do that might actually even be technically possible in the software. They don't stop you, but you probably should understand that you're making a choice. And if you're at least making that conscious choice, rather than just doing it blindly, right, without understanding that maybe it's having an impact on your reader because you're making it harder for them to read. So that's kind of part one of the day, is understanding those principles, and there's a system around it, and on how to kind of work with the different visual elements. When I say visual elements, what I mean is things like size and hue and intensity and shape and position as kind of the main writing elements that you have to work with. There's others, but those are the key ones, and how things you can do with them and things you shouldn't do with them. So that's part one of the day. Part two of the day is actually how to structure a data story, but it's a different kind of data story. So there's the data story that's you should build emotion and have a high point and aha moments, things like that. That's really more when you already know what you want to talk about. Most of the people that are coming into this workshop are doing day-to-day work. So they might be having operational dashboards, or they might be having dashboards that present information that comes out of machine learning algorithms, things like that. But there's a story behind that. And so you can have data stories that are also about these dashboards, and gave them a new term because we don't like to actually say dashboards or reports, because it makes you think about the data. we call them analytic stories. So it kind of combines the analytic side of what you're trying to do and the idea of putting a story together. And I say about that we don't really want to talk about the data because the key to the story is really the decisions and the actions that you want to take, or that your customer in this case wants to take. So the second half of the day is teaching people how to shift that conversation. Most of the world works. Someone shows up at an analyst and says, I want this set of data. Maybe they tell them to make certain kinds of charts, and then they build it, and it doesn't necessarily get the job done. And there's a lot of back and forth. So we give them literally a script and different scripts for how to shift that conversation. And we practice it in the class, and we do some role playing and things like that, so that they can feel the difference about doing that. And that's why I talked about kind of that personal change, that behavioral change that you have to do. It's, you kind of, I say you have to have a little bit of courage to try this out, right? Because it's different, and it also sounds weird the first time you hear and talk about it, because it is different. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the second part of the day, is how do you start to create that story, and then some techniques for validating that the story is good visually. And then actually, how do you then go into the software? We don't technically, how do you get into the software, but we say that's the last step. If you do all these other pieces well, by the time you actually go into the software, which I just think of as a word processor, a visual word processor, right? You know what you want to write, you can go in and start writing well if you're good with it. And there's a key idea that we talk about in this whole structure. Is called intent before content. Because if you don't know the idea you want to communicate, then you can't figure out the best way to show that visually. So, right, the reverse of that is, if you know the idea you want to communicate, then you can decide how to show it visually, and then you can figure out what data you need to put in, so that we kind of reverse the order where the data is actually coming in last.
That's fantastic, and I have super valuable information there. So then let me ask the next question is why you answered already why your students like the workshop. Why is it that you like to teach this workshop?
Again, I think it relates back to that practical aspect, because a lot of these elements evoke discussion. And that's really key, because, right, as much as I love to get through all the material, right, an important aspect of this is for the students to be able to raise a question. Hey, I'm dealing with this at work. How would I address it? Or they might say, I like that idea, but there's absolutely no way that's going to fly if I try it. And we say, okay, yeah, that's what everybody says, right? Not here. We can't do it here. Let's talk about, why do you think that it's not going to work out, right? Because the other people in the room probably have similar thoughts going around in their head. They're just not saying it. So that's really a big thing, where now I know that I'm also helping them make that progress, right? Because really what I want them to do is, by the end of the day, I really want them to have in their mind just a couple of things that they can do, right? And that's what I tell them right from the start. I said, just hone in. You're going to hear a lot. Pick out the things that resonate the most with you, that you feel like that you personally can do them, that they'll be accepted at work, and latch onto those and do those. Have some successes. And then you can start, once you have those successes, you can start to introduce more of the elements of what we go over during the day. So don't try to go back and worry about, I have to do every single step that I learned today, or none of it's going to work. That's not the case. So having that discussion, other people get to hear, yeah, I have those same problems, right? It's not just me. It's not just that my company is the one that's dysfunctional, right, in some aspect. And so to me, that's one of the most important things that they can do, is they can actually get that kind of help,
Hmm.
and walk away feeling like that they can put some of this into action. Because if they don't put it into action, it's a nice day, but what was the point then
Hmm.
if you learned it and you can't do anything with it?
Yeah, well, we hear a lot that kind of peer-to-peer experience in our classrooms and our workshops are really so valuable to those members, and the practical examples that they can go through and have, people that are understanding and maybe can work through it, like yourself, to help them do that is kind of an ideal scenario. So I do want to ask a prying question here, not to spoil anything for those that maybe attending here, but I did hear about uh dinosaurs in your classroom. Is that right? What is that
Yeah.
about?
Well, I guess I really can't talk about it too much, because then it would
Yeah,
spoil the surprise. But yeah, there isn't there's I'll just say there's a dinosaur theme,
nice.
and there are dinosaur related prizes
Okay,
and
great.
handouts. So it's kind of, again, one of these things, like, how do we make this interesting
Hmm.
throughout the day so that we can kind of keep things going. It's also to uh, get people to participate, and because they want to get the prizes. So we want people jumping in and contributing as well throughout the day. So it's just give them a little incentive in a fun way.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I won't. Yeah, I didn't mean to spoil anything there, so sorry if I did, but I'm very interested. I might have to follow up with you to see exactly what is involved there offline. So
Yeah, we're
okay.
gonna have to keep this on, honor code on that one.
Yeah. So okay, I only have a couple questions left for you. And the second to last here is, maybe you've already touched on this, but what would be the top ideas you would like those students of yours, as we were talking,
Hmm.
to put into action when they're able to be done with the course and go back to their day-to-day work?
Well, actually, I can talk about one of the activities. So one thing I have them do is, at the end of one of the first session, and everybody gets like this little gift bag. There's like little things in it that we use throughout the day. One of the things is a note card. What I have them do is I have them write down on the note card one thing that they are going to stop doing based on what we talked about so far during the day. And then I have them put an X through it. And the X is symbolic, right? Like, I am going to stop. I am not going to, like, a mental connection
Hmm.
with that. And it's anonymous. Then I collect all the cards. It's anonymous, and I shuffle them up. And then I read them out, because I want people to hear different things that people have said. So in some ways, they self-selected at least one thing that they will take as an initiative to do. Uh, Outside of that, I think the other issue I brought up before is to stop thinking so much about the data and really have that focus on the business, on what is it that are the drivers of the decision making and taking action. And again, what we learn is how to extract that from people through conversation. And it's a big shift, again, because that's what people are used to talking about, is the data. And it's like, no, the data is just, the way I describe it is, the decisions and the actions are the stars of the story. And now the data is just the supporting actor. It used to be the star, but it's really the supporting actor in what you're doing. And we just kind of drill that in throughout the day to just constantly reinforce that notion.
Perfect. That's great. And okay, so final question here, kind of continuing on this topic. what would be potentially the most controversial issue that you bring up in this classroom?
Well, the easy one to talk about, because this always gets everybody going, is when we're talking about color, use of color. And we get into this discussion about what's called color vision deficiency, which used to be called color blindness. And we talk about why it's not called color blindness anymore. But the real issue at heart is we get into discussion about red and green and using those together, and why that can be problematic for people with certain vision conditions. And of course, this red, yellow, green, or red, green is so built in to the culture of how companies depict information, right? And I basically say, you got to stop.
Right.
I mean, it's got to lay it out there and say, and then of course we talk about, all right, well, what are my options? How do I approach this? But it gets into a discussion because people are like, how am I going to do this, right? This is what everybody likes. This is what they do. And so I think that's, while it's not controversial that it's crazy, but it's controversial that it stirs up, like, I don't know how I'm going to get this done from that perspective. I think everybody agrees with it. By the time we end the conversation, they realize why it's important, but the execution is not necessarily so easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, color, when we're saying this here on this podcast, sounds like a trivial aspect to things, but it really isn't. And especially in the world of visualization, color is a very impactful and important piece of what you're building out there. So it does make sense that that discussion would be had. Okay, Lee. Yeah. So I do want to let you go at this time. I know you're busy. But what I would like to end with here is, if someone is listening or tuning into this podcast and they're interested in striking up a conversation with you, maybe they can't get to TDWI Orlando for the classroom, what would be the workshop? What would be the best way for them to get in contact with you if they wanted to reach out?
Best ways are simple. They can email me. Lee@decisionviz.com, and my website, decisionviz.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn. I'm writing frequently. Always happy to stir up a conversation there if people want to touch base, and if that's easier for them than on email or coming into the website.
Perfect. Okay, just as a reminder, you can catch Lee in TDWI Orlando. November 5th through November 10th is when the conference is going on. And of course, you can find more of that information at tdwi.org under our events tab. Lee, it was a fantastic conversation with you. I really enjoyed talking about this, and thank you so much for your time. Okay.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed talking about it.